All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Josephine and Amata. We had a few more people registered, so maybe everyone's running late, or like we were just discussing, both Richa and I have sick households at the moment, so maybe they've all got sick households. I don't know, is your son sick at the moment, Bernado? Or is this a
No, he's doing well.
Yeah.
But yesterday they had a power outage at his childcare center, and they couldn't open the center. So I was there to start today, to start writing my thesis, and then they told me, no, sorry, you need to go home with Rafi, and I had to spend half of the day with him, and everything that I was going to do was like, no, my wife. Yeah, so this is some of the things that we can discuss today, and yeah.
Very true. All right, well, I might start then. We might formally start. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their ancestors and descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. I'm joining today from Yagara and Turrbal country, which is in Meanjin or Brisbane. So if you would like to say where you're joining from, Richa and Bernado, when you speak, or if anyone else would like to put it in the chat, please do so. I think it's really important that we continue to acknowledge their custodianship of country, particularly given some recent political challenges to the idea of acknowledgement of country. And so a few housekeeping notes before we begin. So this event is being recorded and will be uploaded on YouTube. We love seeing your faces, of course, but it's absolutely fine to keep your video off, especially if you don't want your video to be recorded, or if you're having some problems with your camera or internet problems, as Josephine noted in the chat. We ask also if you can keep your microphones muted, but then during the Q&A session, feel free to come off mute and speak during that process. So the plan for today is for each of us to just speak for maybe 10 minutes and then have a bit of a discussion about some of those points. So feel free to jump in, particularly during that discussion part, about your own experiences, any tips or suggestions you do have. And we do know that people watch these videos later as well. So any tips and suggestions for anyone doing their PhD or have recently had kids and might be struggling would be really great. So I'll start, seeing as I've got the mic already. So just a bit of a background about me. So I have a, sorry, I started opening a whiteboard for some reason. I'm struggling with illness at the moment that has been brought home from daycare by my 3-year-old. So I actually feel like I'm doing pretty well. He's got conjunctivitis, so I was a bit worried I'd have horrible vision for today, but so far so good. My background before I went into my PhD is in international development and media and publishing. And then I worked in research for a few years. And I started my PhD way back in 2017. And so this is one of the things that I do want to highlight today, is just how much longer it can then take if you do have children during your PhD. I've got friends who literally started the same day as me and have recently been promoted from a level A to a level B in the academic system. So just kind of trying to balance those expectations compared to other people who might have started the journey at the same time as you. So not only did I start my PhD in 2017, my partner thought it would be a really good idea to study medicine. So he started his medical degree in 2018. And then we had a baby in early 2019. So our son was born in January 2019. So I took about 6 months of leave during that time. I was quite fortunate that my scholarship allows for 3 months of paid leave, and then I took a little bit of unpaid leave because I'm entitled to the government paid parental leave in Australia as a citizen, which is something that I'm quite fortunate to be able to access. But then I had to go back to work kind of when my son was about 5 months old, just in order to pay rent. And so then I officially restarted my PhD in early 2020 when I started to collect data. I'm an ethnographer, so obviously that all went a bit haywire, trying to collect data just as the pandemic hit. And then so there was all the problems related to having a child who was, over a year old during the pandemic, and a lot of the access to resources and so forth, like childcares and so forth, were closed. So a lot of trying to balance that. And then in 2021, I spent most of last year, well, it wasn't most, it felt like most, but really it was only about, I guess, 7 months of last year pregnant, and then had a second child in January this year. So she's about 6 months at the moment. So in theory, I'm submitting my PhD next year. If my supervisors end up watching this, I'm definitely submitting my PhD in early next year. If they're not, I have no idea when I'm going to submit. And so part of the problems and challenges, I guess, with doing a PhD while parenting, there's a lot of pressures on PhD students in general, right? And we've been talking a lot through TASA Thursdays, but also more broadly in postgrad circles about a lot of the increasing pressures that we have. And so we've got financial pressures. So as a PhD student, everyone's got financial pressures anyway. The scholarship is below living wage. So I actually get more money getting the government paid parental leave. So getting that, which is minimum wage, is actually significantly more than what my scholarship is, for example. And I know this is something that's starting to be discussed and addressed, but the way that the scholarship hasn't really increased along with, living costs. The other problem is you can go part-time as a parent. Usually there's, depending on your situation and your visa, there are options to go part-time, but a part-time scholarship in Australia is taxed. So then you end up with even less money. So I spent most of 2020 part-time and then had to work extra to make up the financial difference. So I'm not sure it was necessarily worth that. And so we often end up having to supplement this income with part-time or casual work, which can be unpredictable, but also a lot of stress. And so PhD students generally have a lot of this stress. Add in parenting, childcare costs, all of that kind of thing as well, just really increases those financial pressures. We've got publishing pressures as PhD students. So you not only have to write your thesis now, you also have to publish multiple publications. You've got to demonstrate impact out in community, do conference presentations. So there's a lot of different things that are pressuring you to do as a PhD student, which then gets all that much harder when you've got children and you can't manage your time as freely as you could before children. So Bernado was explaining earlier about how yesterday childcare was suddenly closed due to no fault of their own or his own, but that, wiped out his day in terms of no matter what you had planned to do, that day is now gone. There's extra experience pressures. I'm at UQ, and I know this is at other universities as well, but there's a lot of expectation on internships and placements at the moment. So a lot of pressure to get experience outside of academia, which in some ways is quite beneficial, but also becomes quite problematic if you're already trying to manage with children. You can't just pack up and go to Canberra for 6 weeks for an internship, for example. There's the continuing PhD pressures, of course, of trying to finish on time. And then the normal PhD pressures around life. So as someone who's getting towards the end of my PhD, I've probably experienced this a bit more, or I'm more aware of it. But there's a lot of pressure from friends, from family about, well, why can't you come to such and such an event? Why can't you just come meet us for a coffee today? I'm on annual leave, you're a student, why can't you just come catch up? I'm trying to explain that you need to protect your time for PhD, especially when it can be unpredictable with caring responsibilities. So that's sort of a bit of a discussion from me. I've got some tips, but maybe we'll jump to you guys first and you can talk a bit about your experiences. If there's any other pressures that you found, those are the main ones that have impacted on me. Maybe there's different ones for you. And then we can talk about maybe some practical tips after.
Great. All right.
You, Bernado?
Yeah. Just a quick context about my situation. We arrived to Australia in 2014. We are from Argentina. We both, Lucilla, my wife, and me, worked full time for about 5 years now. Oh yeah, 4. And then Rafi came into the world in the middle of COVID-19, April 2020. And what I want to share with you is the other side, because I mean, Laura, your experience is fantastic, and all the challenges that I also faced as a PhD student, but I was the father in this situation. My wife accessed to some parental leave through her job, 3 months, plus we are citizens, so she accessed as well to this 3 months of government support, plus we took some extra leave. So from my side, it was a fantastic opportunity. I would say unique opportunity in my life, because we always hear that doing a PhD it's a unique opportunity because you do research, you work from home, you have flexibility, you do what you love. And so I did that while I had my son at home. So we all know all the implications of having a son in terms of time, sleeping, difficulties, first few months, if it is a first son or daughter, we are learning while we go with the flow. And so my wife needed a lot of support because we are, as migrants, we don't have family here. And it was just us, and it was COVID-19 in Perth. There was not much of COVID, but Rafi was born in that month where everything was super strict here. So we didn't even have our friends to get support. So it was me here from home, giving her a break, going to appointments, or just helping her with whatever was needed, or going to the pharmacy, to the shops. And that flexibility that the PhD was giving me was fantastic. It was really helpful. My wife keeps saying, when we have the second one and you're working full time, I don't know how we're gonna do that. So I was like, I work from home. I don't usually drive to uni because it's 1 hour away. So I pretty much do all my, other than field work, I write my thesis from my house. So my wife was, just in the living room. I was, of course, I was managing my time because I had all the pressures that Laura was highlighting, but that was really important. But so that's one great opportunity I had. And the second one has to do with my well-being, mental health, and the educational process for my son and for us as a family. I think it was unique because, I mean, being able to be with your wife and son all day, teaching him whatever you want, but I mean, it's unique. It's not going to happen again in life, apart from the challenges, of course, of being at home all day together. I think that I will miss it a lot next year when I need to go back to work full time. So I really enjoyed it, having my son here and taking a break and being with him, playing with him, and that time for him of having mom and dad together in the house for our kids is really, really important. So that's our two great opportunities that I find in this experience as a PhD student. And going back to challenges, apart from the economic challenges that some of the economic challenges you were highlighting, Laura, that are really important. And I really want to highlight the position of temporary migrants as well. My research is on temporary migration in Australia. And I did have a lot of interviews with temporary migrants, and I know how much they struggle with budgets. I mean, especially when the kids needs to go to a child care center. They're really expensive. They don't get any support at all from the government. So it's a really different position. And as apart from the economic challenges, the second aspect I want to highlight has to do with the social care networks. I mean, support. Not having the family, it's a huge difference. So as a PhD student, that moment, that time that you can spend at home with your wife, well, in my case, it was really important, because my wife didn't have her mother or my mother or father or brothers to be here helping her if I was not going to be here. But I was, so it was great. But raising a son or daughter as a PhD student without support from your family, it is really difficult. But that's another discussion. I mean, we're talking about our role as PhD students. So yeah, I mean, that's a bit of my experience. I just wanted to highlight some positive aspects of the process, because I think that there are a lot. And so now I'm looking forward to just finish my PhD. Rafi is going to the childcare center. So as you were saying, Laura, and we were discussing before with you, Richa, when Rafi is sick, that's another discussion and a negotiation with my partner, because I'm doing a PhD, but I really need to keep going with my writing, and she's the one working full time. She's back in the school working, and so we try to go half and half. When Rafi is sick, that happens a lot. Unfortunately, when they start going to the childcare center, they get every bag it's around. Uh, so yeah, we just try to take leave and negotiate that, so that I can keep track of my work as well. So I will pass it to you, Rich. I don't know if there are any other challenges, opportunities you would like to add, but that was a bit of my experience.
Thanks, Bernardo, and thank you for actually you've done a lot of the talking for me in that sense, because the temporary migrant that you described is me. So I'm an international student. So like starting off with the positives, I'm an international student, and I started here in 2020. Started my PhD in early 2020, and the pandemic hit, and I went to India in the middle of the year because it was getting hard. The plan was always for my partner to join me here, but that wasn't going to happen. So then we met halfway through in India, where we had family, and then we had Theo. And from that lens, a PhD sort of is a blessing from that sense, because it's something that I think it's a decision that you take. And okay, I guess the thing that I have to say is, if you're thinking about when you can have a child, there's no real right time, there's no real bad time. Anytime is going to be a crap time to have a child. But then the goods that came out of it when I was part of the PhD was that it was easy for me to take leave. It was okay for me to take an extended leave for health, and for the fact that I was stranded in India, not able to return to Australia, while also knowing that my research is going to still be there, and I'm going to still have that position. It's not like someone else is going to fill up that, in a traditional industrial sort of setting. So that sort of security is always there. But also, having come from, I existed in that cocoon in India where I had family close by. So, even when I was trying to get back to work, even though I didn't have access to my actual field work, I could do some of the work while still having, having someone to take care of the child if I, in terms of like family and grandparents, if I needed them to. Coming to Australia, I guess the challenges sort of doubled down, because I moved with a very, very young infant to a place that is virtually foreign to everyone, including me, after 2 whole years of not being here, I guess. And in that sense, and like starting afresh. And that the challenges that you described in terms of being a temporary migrant is very real for someone like me who's on a student visa. So my partner, myself, my child, we're all on student visas. So the matter of economics becomes really hard. Like childcare, we don't have access to childcare subsidies, so it costs almost like 40 grand a year. That's way more than like 10 to 12 grand more than what you get as your PhD stipend. So fortunately, my partner has a good job in that sense, but also in that sense, it's also possibly, because it's an industry job, it's also very rigid in terms of what the flexibilities. So a lot of that flexibility burden has to be borne by me. And in order to feel like you're a contributing member of the family, because the stipend is not enough, you end up taking a lot of extra jobs. And then that becomes a bit of a, it's one of those interstellar kind of loops, because you've taken up extra teaching jobs, for example, because you want to get income, but also now you don't have time to do your actual PhD. The one difference being that I've noticed between like things that my partner does and what I do is that in order to be able to do the sort of really the critical analysis that we need to do, the kind of writing that we need to do, I feel like your brain needs to be at capacity. And I find it really hard, at least that's my personal experience, is that I find it really hard to sort of either switch context from like, having a child sort of compete for my attention while I'm working, or even that whole thing of, oh, I'm sleep deprived for the last 5 days, and now my brain's just like a wet sponge and refuses to cooperate. So those are some of the challenges that have sort of befitted the temporary migrant / international student life of being a parent. And things like not having access to Medicare and stuff like that makes it a lot more harder to be a parent when you're in that situation here. And I guess the income, like you said, the PhD stipend is way below poverty line. We make on average about 30% of what a regular full-time job would be. So in that sense, competing for your time, I'm not in the space right now to even consider the fact that there are publications that are awaiting, there are conferences that I should be doing, there are any number of it's exciting when I see an email about the fact that there's a really interesting lecture here or the really interesting talk going on, but it's just completely beyond what the bandwidth of what you are capable of right now, because right now it's just like I need to somehow get some words on paper, and the fact that you haven't slept or showered or eaten anything, or the fact that you've been sick for 4 continuous months because of your child having gone to daycare and picking up germs, and then the daycare then turning around and saying, by the way, your child is sick. Well, surprise, surprise, from where? But you need to take him home right now. So I guess those are some of those challenges. But would I like turn back time? Absolutely not. Like, I have not had more fun than I have had in the last, like, say 1 year or whatever, because it is so much fun. Like, in that sense, the whole idea of parenting and having a kid, like, kids are ridiculously clever. They're also ridiculously smart and really funny. So I've never laughed as much. My partner and I have laughed as much as we have, like sort of looking at those antics and just seeing the kind of stuff that, they pick up overnight, literally, that they pick up overnight, and you're just dazed and surprised. So there is also that when I'm trying to find balance, there's also that thing about, oh, should I be working through the weekend because my weekdays now I'm teaching? I have that thing of, oh, my child actually goes to childcare 5 days a week so that I can do my PhD on time. But I don't have the time to actually do my PhD work through the week because I'm like teaching and doing other jobs, perhaps. So maybe I should work through the weekend, but I'm also guilty because I really want to spend some time with my child, and the weekend is all I have for it. So there's this ever-present sort of paradox that you can't just, it's a conundrum that you just cannot solve in terms of balancing time and balancing expectations and guilt, like just an insurmountable amount of guilt. So yeah, that's
you just
me.
reminded me, Richa, of this survey that the graduate school at my university did. It was either, I think, late last year or early this year. It's all kind of blurring.
Yeah.
Where there was a series of questions about, do you feel like you're giving up family time for PhD? And so sort of to what extent, etc. And I felt almost dishonest in the way that I was answering, because I didn't feel like I was giving up family time, but as a result, I'm giving up PhD time. And I don't think that was necessarily reflected. So the reason I feel like I have enough time for my family is because I've been largely neglecting the PhD, right? So there's no way that I could actually do both equally.
Oh, yes.
And I think what ends up happening for a lot of people is they're giving up family time in order to finish their PhD.
Perhaps, yes. And sorry to interrupt you, but I share your journey in that sense where I have had like extensions I've gone on intermission and I've done extensions, and I'm perhaps considering another extension because it's just not working out in the same sense as it would. So the idea that I'd have a child, or maybe I'm not sure if there's a gendered aspect to it, like I'm definitely going to be at least a year and change, or perhaps 2 years later than maybe the rest of my cohort in terms of finishing up with the timeline of this PhD. And that's because of the fact that at some level I'm loath to throw away, or like to sort of like encroach the PhD, let the PhD encroach into the time that I guess I mean, maybe I don't even have control over how much time I have to give my family. It just has to happen. Like my partner's also sick and my kid's also sick. Who is going to take care? Like who's going to run the show? Someone has to do grocery shopping. Someone has to do this. Someone has to drop and pick up and like take care of the kid and feed and bathe, and so maybe sometimes it's within our choice and sometimes it's just outside of our control. So yeah.
And in some cases, where you are not entitled to get a government support, PhD students can only take 3 months of leave, which we all know that is very little. I mean, some couples might do great with just 3 months, and they might be ready to. My wife was not ready to go out to work after 3 months. She needed those other 3 months that she was getting through government support. So she had the 6 months. And so it's a really, really difficult position for 3 months for students that are international students and are doing a PhD, and they are not entitled to more than 3 months, because if you don't have the option of, yes, you can take leave without pay, but I don't know if that's an option for many students.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is something that needs to be discussed, and it is a really important challenge.
Well, interestingly, because we had a similar discussion in TASA November last year in the migrant group, migrant, multicultural and ethnicity thematic group. And I found out that a lot of scholarships, so government scholarships that people come here on, actually have no parental leave at all.
Wow.
So they actually have to either basically have no income, which is not really possible, or literally continue working. So have a baby and then the clock is still ticking. And hearing that just made me so stressed, because I'm stressed enough being able to take that time and pause my clock a little bit in terms of when I'm due to submit. And so to not have that and somehow keep working when you've got those other pressures of little financial support, little family support because your family is not here. Like, honestly, I have no idea how people are doing it. It's
and I think it's really worth the discussion from an international student perspective. It's worth a discussion of, in terms of like offering equitable solutions to students, in terms of even things like, childcare subsidies. Like, you would assume that if there is a more, I guess, deprived sort of student community, or community of people who need access to support, it would be like international students. So sort of having that discussion at like a larger level in terms of perhaps like building scholarships around it, or building scholarships around things where, like, you've got 3 months of leave that you can take, and the rest of the leave that I did take was obviously unpaid leave. And at that time, I chose to make that decision because I had a partner working, we were still in India, so we could like gather out our own finances and dip into savings that we had. We don't have access to that or to similar resources or anything here. So yeah, I think there needs to be that discussion. There needs to be conversations from new parents who are PhD students or postgraduate students who are really struggling with the burden of finance and the bureaucracy that doesn't seem to be, offering them any sort of quality of life.
And I think that it's important to highlight the economic side of this issue, but also the emotional side and the mental health, because we all know that having a baby, at least the first one, you go through really stressful times where there are like so many emotions involved. I mean, and that impacts on the writing of your thesis, because you also we all know that how difficult it is to write a thesis, and you need that time, concentration. So going back to the situation you're describing, Rich, and that we're talking about temporary migrants without these entitlements, it is a huge problem, because it's affecting their economic, their budget, but at the same time, they're going through all those emotions, and it's not helping that as well.
Yeah.
So there are two sides that have to do with the well-being, and that can even impact on the household and the kid and the family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially if they're also getting pressure from, so talking to friends who've been in that situation, where they also get pressure from their families back home about, well, why are you choosing to take our grandchildren to the other side of the world, away from us? We don't get to see them. So especially if you feel like you're not quite getting through your PhD as quickly as you should, and there's an additional guilt, right? Of like, well, I'm taking these kids away from grandparents, from emotional support.
Yeah, and I mean,
really
there's also like, there are so many cultural aspects to it as well, because if my child is even on the verge of being unwell, or he's extra tired, I think when we're video calling grandparents back home, and the concept of like a kid being taken to childcare is not very common in like a lot of brown cultures. So it's always, you've got an extended family, they are the village. So at least in most cases, or you've got babysitters, or you've got help at home. So the idea of childcare is still very new, to my family back home. So the idea that if he is even slightly unwell, sending him to childcare is almost like, why would you send him when he's not well? Or, when he's probably a little tired from the last 4 days of going to childcare, and then sort of explaining or justifying your position of, we need to work. And then it's this, but you're a student, like, can you not manage with him back home? So this idea of student equal to, maybe the level of labor is probably less, but just trying to translate that the amount of intellectual zero that you work on most of the days is kind of tough to transcribe that or translate that to parents back home.
I think that flexibility is really key, because it's, in some ways, it's been great that I've been able to be so flexible.
Yeah.
In the work, I can choose when and where I work, but that also means a lot of, as we were discussing earlier, a lot of that burden then falls on you, right? If the child is sick. So I'm fortunate that I do have family close by, and somebody was able to come and look after my 2 sick children, who unfortunately are home today, because this winter has just been a continuous series of illnesses.
Yep.
But not everyone is that lucky, and unfortunately my partner is usually really good, but he's an intern doctor this year, and there's no flexibility and actually they made him use up all of his sick leave. Sorry, they somehow have now turned on a air filter. They're running around outside. But there's, he doesn't have as much flexibility, and the hospital ended up making him use up all of his sick leave when we had COVID last month. So he's actually got no leave now in order to take carer's leave. And he can't be flexible in terms of when he goes into work. So in some ways that kind of then falls on me, because I can be more flexible, which is both beneficial but also challenging.
Yeah.
Because when do I then write? I had plans to do all sorts of work today while they were at childcare, and that has gone out the window. So I have to make that up somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, and to acknowledge the fact that if you've got like an hour in between, you can't get an hour's worth of writing. If you've got an hour between two things that you've got to do, you can probably do about 5 minutes of writing with all the context before and all the context that comes after. So it's just that sort of work. And I mean, we can rant and we can bawl our eyes out. And we've got so many people, we've got so many comments about it. And I was just reading through this chat, and it's so interesting. And especially Josephine, like, yes, Josephine, Josephine, as a single parent with disability and no family support, like it's a completely different ball game. And each person who's spoken today comes from a completely different set of challenges. Josephine, do you want to speak about it, or do you want to just add to the chat?
Hello, I'm happy to speak about it, but I feel a bit self-conscious. A lot of my friends have commented that I've come into their life to show them what they can be grateful for. Because I had to leave my home city and move with my children, and I had no family support and also no co-parenting support. So I literally still today have not had breaks from my children. And I guess that it means that I've watched other people, like you say, comparing yourself with people that don't have that situation, have some support, and they're in a very different place in their career compared to me. Yeah. But at the same time, I think it's so important to come to terms with, I've also made choices around that because I really have prioritized my children, and I don't think I could have done anything else just because of the kind of mother I am. So even though it's a bit sad to see that sometimes, I don't regret prioritizing my children. And in terms of time, I also couldn't put my children into childcare. My eldest has a disability. And so I would literally breastfeed the baby down at night, and I wrote my PhD from like 7 o'clock at night till about 2 in the morning. And now and then the baby would stir and I'd have to feed them again. But that's when I got to write. And then the children would be up again at 5 in the morning. But because they were both preschoolers, they didn't need a lot of intellectual stimulation from me at that time. So I could be brain dead during the day. But certainly now, as they're getting bigger, it's just a whole other ball game. But they got used to going to conferences. I mean, I also agitated for conferences to be inclusive and to accommodate parents and accommodate people with disabilities. So I had some wonderful experiences where people at conferences just welcomed my children. And it meant that my children really like conferences, and they're a bit upset that this year I'm not planning to bring them to the TASA conference. And also the other thing was, I also focused my research on things they were interested in. So I got frustrated. I study masculinities, and I got frustrated with what I was seeing of single fatherhood in children's animated movies. So I wrote a paper on it.
Oh, wow.
And co-wrote with a friend of mine, a colleague that I met at a conference. And yeah, so, I mean, there were ways to get around it as well, because you never turn off that thesis head. Yeah. So you do get through. I encourage you to keep going. But I think, it's also about recognising the kind of parent you want to be. I think that's really valid as well, because you're talking a lot about the pressures from the institution. You're also allowed to give yourself permission to be the kind of parent that you want to be, that you'll live with long term.
I think that's really important. Like I will complain a lot, mostly because I feel very strongly about the way some students get treated. But I should say from the outset that I actually have amazing supervisors who are incredibly, incredibly supportive and never put any of that kind of pressure on me. And I think that's where it's really obvious, because I have other colleagues, other students where I see a lot of pressure about, well, such and such managed to finish in 3 years. Why haven't you finished? That kind of pressure, where their colleague might have finished in 3 years because he didn't have any, he doesn't have children, he didn't have family support. He used to work insane hours, like every weekend he'd be in the office. So he did finish in 3 years and publish 6 papers or something crazy. And he's also brilliant. But that doesn't mean that my other colleagues are not also brilliant, but are also struggling with the fact that COVID hit, they had 2 children at home. They are trying to manage all of those different pressures as well. And they can't just, either they can't or they choose not to spend their weekends. And I think that was a really key point that you made, Josephine, about choosing the kind of parent you want to be. And that's a choice that I made early on, was that I wanted to be there. I wanted to spend that time, but unfortunately that has meant that I'm not publishing, I'm not writing as much as I should. The brain, which I didn't realize because I didn't experience it quite as badly with my first, but my second is now just over 6 months and my brain still can barely function. I don't know if it's just sleep deprivation or a hangover of the hormones, but like not like straightforward stuff I can do, that higher level critical thinking is just not happening at all. And so I don't know at what kind of point that comes back. It'd be interesting to hear, Bernado, if you've experienced that challenge with the high level critical thinking. So is it mostly sleep deprivation and constantly having to think about another human being, or can I just blame hormones?
Well, no, I did experience that. Of course, it was from the other side. My wife took the big portion of it with the sleeping, breastfeeding, and all that. But the great, as I was highlighting before, having the flexibility of doing a PhD probably meant that instead of starting at 8 o'clock, as I usually do, I would start at 10. When Rafi was 3 months, 5 months, my wife would be sick or tired or needed to just sleep and rest, and I would start a bit later or work at night. And so I try to also do my half as well. And yeah, so it was challenging at the very beginning, but I think that well, we need to work with institutions and needs to push harder in terms of our rights as PhD students and more entitlements, because when you read the policies, they are crazy. I mean, they are not inclusive at all. And we are not even talking about temporary migrants. I also think that we do our best as parents, as Josephine and you, Laura, were saying. We try to decide what kind of parent we want to be. In my case, I had from the very, very beginning very clear that I wanted to be with my son. I enjoy that moment as a PhD student. So it was first my family and my son, and then my PhD. And I did have a conversation with my supervisors, and they had that very clear. So yeah, I mean, in terms of sleep, I must admit that I did well. I mean, I was able to administer that pretty well with the flexibility that a PhD can give to students.
Yeah. Steve, do you have anything, like, what did you think about the discussion as someone who has been, I guess, been past the PhD stage, but your partner's doing a PhD right now, and with a kid, with a young toddler?
Thanks, Richa. I'm listening intently, and actually, to be fully honest, my wife is in the background making her lunch, so she's been nodding along furiously. And this is going to sound the opposite of perhaps what this is intended in some ways, but she was really struck by the numbers of stories that parallel with her own experience, and even mouthed, actually she said out loud, maybe I should just quit because the system seems so stacked against people. And yeah, so it's really striking. I don't have really much more to add. It's a really fascinating conversation, and I think a really important opportunity for people to come together and share those experiences, and show some solidarity. And I think lots of people don't get it, actually. As much as we love our colleagues and peers, lots of them don't understand those pressures. And I really loved/hated the conversation about how we cannot, we can't invest the time in our PhD because our families, for many of us, have to come first. And that probably depends on who you are in the relationship and all of that kind of stuff. And if you're in a relationship, and the pressures are different from person to person. But anyway, I just think that parents of children who are doing their PhD have an experience that's clearly very different to lots of our peers. And we are imagined by the system to be an ideal kind of character and be able to clearly delineate. So my wife's part-time PhD and full-time worker, and mum as well. So the system imagines that she can have 2 days a week completely unencumbered. She can just do it. And I'll give you an example, actually. So she's on intermission at the moment, and they imagine she can come back from her intermission and do her mid-can milestone 5 days after coming back. So they've emailed her now during her leave to tell her, oh yeah, we've arranged your mid-can and it's 5 days after you come back. So they are imagining that she can do the work in the intermission period to write her mid-can. Like it's wild. And I think that, yeah, exemplifies the way we are imagined as being able to dissolve our children and our familiar responsibilities or outsource them or something. Yeah, and the modern university just doesn't have a grip on it, which is scary.
I'm due to give my final thesis review 2 weeks after I return. Clearly that's not going to happen.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I am considering, because I'm considering taking an extension on another 3-month extension, because it's just gotten too much at this point. And I didn't plan when I was writing up my first extension plan. That's what I'm planning to write up for my second one. I'm like, I didn't budget so much, 4 months of sickness, sort of like 4 months of like the whole family being sick, kind of seeping into the time that I thought I could have for my PhD. So yeah, it's not easy when you're like completely sick as a dog to, I guess, be critical about masculinity.
And Susanna just made a great comment about feeling guilty to apply for extensions. And I think that's really important, because there is this kind of like, you have to justify why, like, why haven't you done what actually nobody ever really does, right? Like very few people finish their whole PhD in 3 weeks, in 3 years. Sorry, my brain is, I'm still half listening to the screaming toddler. But Spidey is on now, so he should be all right. So I also don't feel guilty about screen time. My children watch a lot of screen time. This is the only way I can do things. But there's a lot of that pressure about, why do you apply? Why do you have to justify? Our university, and again, this came in early this year and I've been on leave, so I haven't really engaged with it, but I'm pretty sure we just got rid of extensions. So we no longer have extensions, I think. We now have, they've extended it to 3.5 years, and instead of milestones, they're progress reviews, and you have to do them at the time, regardless of what stage you're at. So like, which in theory will be good, right? Because it's an opportunity to reflect on where you are at. But also, I think this is going to lead to institutional pressure to finish in a more timely fashion, which is great if you have all of those supports and you don't have children or other caring responsibilities. I mean, we're focusing very much on children here, but people also have caring responsibilities for other people in their lives, for elderly family members. Everyone's got different circumstances, and I think a lot of the process here, as has been commented a lot in the chat, as well as from people, that the institutions aren't really keeping up with the realities. We're deemed to be this perfect, ideal situation. Lots of people have said to me that PhD is a great time to have children. Mostly it was men who said this though, so I don't know what that says.
I know, I agree. And I one major thing that I remember was I was preparing for my first milestone while I was really heavily pregnant. And I remember I was writing up maybe for 12 or 16 hours a day. My back hurt so much even when I breathed. But that was still, and I'm still, now that I have to write up for my second milestone, I'm hoping to go back to that time when at least I had, even though it hurt a lot, like physically it hurt a lot more than it does now, I still had the gift of time. And I would, probably in a second, I would go back to all of that physical discomfort just to have that level of time and be able to shut myself in a room for 12 hours a day, even if it meant not having a riding station or like sitting on a bed at a weird angle or whatever that is. And yeah, a lot of people said this is the best time to have a child, and it's already coming. Oh my God, there's like 1 year's already gone. Have you considered the next one? I'm like, not over my dead body if I'm going to think about ever finishing this PhD, but also, with as soon as I had my first child, I thought, now everything's going to go spick span, and I still have this many years left for the 3.5-year mark to hit. And I'm thinking about it very practically, and the extensions just seem, it just came out of nowhere. Like I needed them, and I needed the extra time. So perhaps, what I'm trying to say is, I didn't know, or I didn't plan for the number of interruptions that would come even in a PhD. And I wonder if it's the same for a different sort of career, what sort of interruptions and what kind of consequences you have.
I think that there is a lot to discuss, again, in terms of going back to the discussion around institutions. I mean, very simple things. I know that we are all from different universities, we all have different policies, but think simple things as taking sick leave. In the University of Western Australia, if I take a day for sick leave, they don't add it to I can be like 10 days on sick leave, but they won't add it to the L of my candidature. So in 2 years that Raf is 2 years old, I mean, in these last 2 years, I took a lot of sick leave. I didn't even let the university know. I mean, I was with him here at home for 4 days with gastro, with mouth, and this, whatever he was getting at the childcare center.
COVID.
Yeah, all the ones on the list. And that's not extra time that there are. So those, and if my wife or any person that works full time takes leave, they pay that day because they have sick leave. I mean, it's another different way of working, but those simple things that have to do with institutional arrangements for us to be able to be PhD students and do our work, they should be fixed. When I did take my parental leave, my 10 days, I was really happy that at least they were so nice to add that to my end. So they extended 10 days my candidature. But other than that, I mean, there's a lot to discuss, hey?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only entitled to paid parental leave as part of my scholarship once. So technically I could take it twice, but you're only entitled to 12 weeks. And because I took the 12 weeks the first time, I therefore was not entitled to any parental leave the second time. So I took it as special sick leave, but that now means if my child gets really sick, I've got nothing. It's all very, I mean,
that is special sick leave, did they add it to the end of your candidature?
Yeah,
okay, well, that's good.
They did, yeah. So we can have up to 3 months of special sick leave.
Is that paid though?
Paid.
Oh.
Yeah, so it depends on the scholarship.
Yeah.
And again, this is why it's so tricky, because all different scholarships are different. Every university policy is different.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate to be on one of the government RTP scholarships, but if you're on a scholarship from your own university, I think I mentioned earlier, I found out last year a lot of those scholarships from other countries don't include parental leave at all. So all of those kind of things make it very complicated. We're at time, and I'm conscious that we could probably continue talking about this for a very long time.
It is like going to the psychologist. We should organize these more often.
So I feel very passionately about this. I wasn't going to admit it, but I will now, that I went to my first TASA conference pregnant in 2019, and I met Steve there. You wouldn't remember me at all, but I remember you with the little baby, and I remember it being so inspiring. And now that I've done that, I'm like, I don't know how you did that. Because whenever I've tried, it's just been a nightmare.
It's definitely tricky. I feel like the visibility thing is so important though. Like I didn't have an easy time, but actually also my wife wasn't having an easy time at the time as well. So it was important for her sake that I brought my son with me. And I thought that was the best one that I've been to with kids. I think it was well set up.
Yeah.
So I think it does depend on the circumstances that are built around us as well, and you know, the mood of the kid on the day.
Well, that's exactly it, right? I think it's so important that we continue having these conversations. It's something I feel very, very passionately about, which is one reason I've been so honest about it over the past few years.
Yeah.
I do think if this is something people are interested in, maybe we should just have like a monthly come along and bitch about your life sessions.
Absolutely.
That could work really well, especially
and
with children running around in the background.
Josephine on the chat was mentioning about a book that is written about mom's PhD or something.
PhD.
And I do have another colleague with Dorinda here at the University of West Australia that she does research around PhD students from Indonesia and household family. So I'm sure there is a lot of research around these same topics. So if anyone knows any book like you, Josephine, or publication, it would be nice to share it around so that this discussion can move forward. And yeah, I mean,
I was going to say, I was just looking on my bookshelf. I do have Mama PhD, but I can't find it right now. I was going to hold it up. But yeah, please, if anyone's got any good suggestions, I think it's something that we do need to talk about, particularly from different perspectives. Obviously, I'm a lot more fortunate. I have familial support where I am. Not everyone is in that situation, which is why I've got someone at the moment who can kind of run interference with the kids. But also, like, everyone's got different experiences. So I think it's really important that we continue these conversations, share information as much as we can, and help people realize that we're not alone, because sometimes it can feel like you're struggling way more than anyone else, and nobody else seems to have this same problem. I've seen that with other new parents who somehow seem to be turning up every day and producing and producing and producing, but then actually if you talk to them away from that, they're struggling just as much, but the persona kind of gives this impression that they're somehow able to magically do everything. I don't think I've ever given anyone that impression that I can.
Neither have I.
So I'm very open to letting everyone know how hard it is. But we might have to wrap it up there because we are at time. But thank you so much for joining us today. Please do continue to have these conversations. Please let us know if there's anything else you want to add or any resources. Please do share that paper when it does come out with Shauna, please, Josephine. And just a quick plug for our next month, TASA Thursdays, the special postgrad session will focus on digital methods. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, please give us any feedback you have.
Thank you, guys. It's been an amazing session.